Hello and welcome to SEO Rankings Do Follow podcast. Here we hold regular talks with SEO and digital marketing experts to discuss hot SEO topics and share actionable insights with the SEO community. So subscribe to stay on top of everything going on in SEO. In today's episode, we're going to talk about conducting keyword research across languages, localizing for international SEO, and understanding local search intent. I'd like to welcome our guest, Adriana Stein, the founder and CEO at AS Marketing. Welcome, Adriana. Great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super happy to be here.
And we want to just jump right into it. And we would like to start. I would like to start by asking you to share a bit about your background in SEO. What sparked your interest in multi-language keyword research and international SEO?
Yeah. So as with many people in SEO, I didn't actually intend career-wise to get into SEO, but it's kind of one of those things that just falls into place with life. So I'm originally from the US, but I've been living in Hamburg, Germany for over 7 years now. And I originally moved here to study and also learn German. And long story short, that didn't quite work out that way because of a very difficult German test. But the big advantage to learning German for the first 6 months while I was here was I had basically opened a whole new career path through that. So when I was unable to get my student visa, then the foreigners office suggested, well, you speak German now and you're a native English speaker, so why don't you try doing like translations? So I was like, okay, well, I have a degree in writing and English, and so I've been writing all my life, so let's give that a try. And I heard from a friend there was this small ads website where you could write about your language skills and what you could offer. And from that, I was able to get directly some clients who needed support with content writing, mainly from German to English. They were German companies who wanted to expand into the US. And so from this, it kind of just fell into my plate that I could work directly with the marketing team. And I got a very in-depth training in SEO because I worked with a couple marketing managers over the next year. And so that kind of ended up being what I specialized in. And now I'm actually glad I didn't get into university because I think this is much better. And over the years, basically demand for that just grew, especially because Germany is one of the most interesting markets for most companies in the world who want to expand, I must say. And then the opposite is also true for German companies. They want to go into the English markets. And so that kind of became where I was this bridge with my language skills. And then I just ended up scaling that as well because there was so much demand from that, especially nowadays with, how much personalization the average customer expects. And so now my team and I support global clients in over 30 languages with native speakers. So we have projects at any one time that may have 10 plus languages going on, and we have our native speaker dedicated per each market. And we also offer not just SEO, but holistic international marketing. So PPC, we do a lot of Google ads, but also all sorts of paid advertising, email marketing, brand strategy, which goes a lot into international marketing with how you kind of align your messaging and all of that. So that's a bit to where we are today in a shorter version, I must say.
Yeah, it looks like you're the perfect person for this because like working with 30 languages on an ongoing basis seems like you can tell us a lot and share with us about doing international keyword research. And continue the topic, let's jump into the search intent, keyword research. How does search intent and user behavior differ across languages and cultures?
Yeah, so I think this question is really the fundamental premise of all international marketing because all languages and cultures are different. So one country is not the same as another country. This is actually a common, starting point for especially companies from the US to actually understand, okay, Europe is not one country. Europe is like all of these different countries that are very, very different from each other in terms of language, in terms of culture. And so you can't just copy paste, a mass market global approach. You really have to focus on localization. So understanding all of those different nuances within the market, how the buyer cycle is different, This is a really big one in B2B. For example, people in Germany purchase things very, very differently than in the US and the UK. They take a lot longer. They want a lot more information. They read a lot more. They're actually not so visually focused. They like to have a lot of conversations, involve a lot of people in the decision. Whereas in the US, it's kind of like, go, 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 make a decision. We want to do the next best thing. And so, all of these things go into how you actually set up your SEO strategy. And then you need to, really do your research on each market and each language, because there are major, major differences for how those are going to be. And even though that is a little bit more effort, versus just, directly translating everything, you're going to get a lot more conversion-wise, and just a deeper understanding of that market is going to build a lot of relationships within that market long-term. So a little bit more effort is going to be a lot more rewarding in the end.
The next question we have is about the difference between just translating and localizing in the context of keyword research. So could you explain the biggest difference between these two approaches to producing content for different regions?
Yeah, so that's one of the most common things that we come across when we're having like a discovery call with a new client. Is a lot of the time they have done some form of translation across their content. It can be AI, but it could also be just a human translation. But there's a difference there from localization. So translation is you're kind of just taking, in the context of SEO and content, you're kind of just taking, one word or phrase and just putting it into that other language. And you're not so much thinking about context and how that directly applies to SEO specifically. But with localization, you're really going a lot deeper. And this starts predominantly with keyword research. So we've found that I would say probably 90% plus of the websites, at least that I've looked at, my team has looked at, when you just directly translate things, it doesn't really impact market performance. It doesn't impact SEO, because how you phrase things and what people search for in different languages are very different, and what they mean in those different languages are different. So you actually need to go through and localize your SEO strategy first, not just translate it, but localize, do your actual keyword research within that language, look at the competitors within that language, within that market, because those are going to be completely different as well. Competitors in English are going to be completely different from the competitors in Germany, France, Italy, etc. There are lots of established companies in those markets that are already have long been doing things within the local language. And so you have to basically become as local as they are, and then even surpass those customer expectations and that level of localization if you actually want to make it within a new market as a global or international company. So you have to look at, what keywords have search volume? Do they have different intents behind them? This is another major difference between the German and the US market, for example. In Germany, whereas a lot of keywords that may be labeled transactional, they may be much more informational within the German market. So if you're trying to take a transactional landing page from the US and then just translate it into German, then you probably won't even rank for it at all if you have an informational intent behind that keyword. And of course, even if you promote it, then it's still not going to work that well, because this market they just like to read. They like to really comprehensively understand something before they buy. So there's all these little nuances that you have to understand, and then it's much more worth it in the long run, especially when you look at cumulative search volume, because when you translate one keyword to another, in a lot of cases, it's zero search volume. The hot topic, of course, zero search volume keywords, but within this context, I definitely suggest focusing on looking for keywords with search volume, because it shows you how that market actually phrases things, how they phrase things within that specific language, what they're searching for, and that's going to give you a lot better idea. So you're going to have to do your own manual keyword research really for that to happen.
In your experience, what are the most widespread misconceptions about this approach?
Yeah, I mean, really the most major thing is just equating translating your website into another language with doing international marketing and then expecting there to be growth within that market simply from that. 9 times out of 10, unless you're like a really, really well-known enterprise brand that everyone, you have that visibility within that market already. So that excludes a lot of companies. In most cases, it's not going to work because you have to first understand that market and how do you actually approach them? How do you actually write content for them? How do you actually localize everything? Because when you just do, like an AI translation, this is like the number one thing that we find when clients come to us and they say, hey, we want to expand into this market, and we've done all of this. We've translated our website into 10 languages, but we're not really getting any leads. We're not getting any conversions. And then we look just very simply at the traffic. What is the organic traffic from that market? Most of the time, it's nothing. And there you go. There's your answer why. So that's where localization is really it's a whole other playing field when it comes to international marketing, but it's just so much more effective on growth because it really shows you how you can actually interact and engage with that market based on content that is important to them.
I'd like to jump a bit more into specifically keyword research and ask you what tools, platforms, or how do you actually conduct keyword research for multi-language projects?
We found across my team that really any SEO tool that has keyword research available in another language is pretty sufficient for starting out. So you can start there, but the most important thing that you want to still do manually is actually look at the SERPs. So Google something and make sure that you have your settings for that specific market and language set up. A really good little plugin for this is SEO Quake, and you could set for example, especially countries that have multiple languages, like Canada, you can say Canada and French and then Canada and English, and then you can look at those SERP differences. And one of the best ways that you can start understanding what are the most important keywords for that market is, okay, first you can start with a direct translation of your keyword, but then look at the SERPs and look what's appearing. And, is this something that shows up? Am I seeing big competitors here that I know about? So do I have the phrasing right or not? And then take that information and then dive deeper into your SEO tool. So whichever one you use, just make sure that you have the market and the language selected because there is a big difference, like with Canada, for example, is a good example of that one. And then see what else comes up in terms of related searches or broad searches or questions or things like that. And there you'll see their major differences, especially in terms of search volume or how something is phrased. We just had a particular project, an IT company from the US that wants to expand into Germany. And funnily enough, IT is an industry where they speak a lot of English in the German language, or also Danglish, like a weird combination of German and English. And we found all of these keywords that were actually Danglish, and that's what had the most search volume. So that's where you have to kind of go in and dig through and see what appears in your SEO tool and see what kind of starts to pop up and think about what are the different ways that I could phrase this across this language and kind of just see what there's search volume for.
While you were talking, I was thinking there are two people that possibly can be responsible for a task that you're doing. So one person knows the language that they're working with, and the other one is just an expert in the SEO, for example. How do you stay updated with local search trends and countries or languages that you might not be fluent in?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of our projects are structured so basically, there's a top-level expert that knows the channel ins and outs, all of the technical parts really well, and ideally they speak at least one of the languages natively, and they're kind of the project lead or the project manager. And then whatever other markets and languages that project then encompasses, there's a native speaker from that market, so they know the language, they know, all of those cultural trends, they know anything to keep an eye out on, especially, for example, if there's even a different search engine. We found in Eastern Europe, there are a lot of these different little search engines for different languages that people use a lot. the native speakers, they know all of these things, and then they kind of inform the larger strategy at whole that the project manager is kind of overseeing, to make sure it's cohesive and it's not like one language is going too far this way or too far that way or something. And so that's kind of how we keep everything still very cohesive and very growth driven, especially very simple for maybe we just have one contact from within the client side, from the US or the UK or the Germany, for example. But then all of the other markets are still functioning beneath that. Really, to answer your question simply, is just work with a native speaker, from that market, and they're going to know that stuff because they're speaking the language all the time. So that's what they're there for.
Yeah, I was hoping there was going to be maybe a way around it, but yeah, in our experience, we all at the end of the day, we get better results once we involve somebody who has actual experience living there or is a native to the country. Yeah. Another question is, what are some best practices for SEOs when managing a multi-language website?
Yeah, so that's something I think I could do a whole day-long workshop on because there's so much in there. But if I could break it down into really technical and content, and I'll start at technical because technical is a part that it often gets overlooked or even more so often is done incorrectly. And it's one of the most common mistakes that we find when a client is initially setting up to go multi-language, and then they're also struggling with getting conversions or even just getting things to rank, and they're wondering why. So the technical part is super important. So the number one thing is that each language on your website needs its own home. So don't try to put different languages on the same page, and make sure that you have ideally a subfolder set up for each language. So, example.com/FR for France, example.com/DE for Germany, example.com/IT for Italy. You may have within your tech stack some limitations for this. So you may have to do a subdomain instead, like de.example.com. That's another option. But if you can, ideally try to keep it within the subfolder, because then all of the authority that's built up from the original language that you've had your website in will then be transferred to those other languages, and it just makes them that much faster to set up. So that's really the major thing. And then make sure that you have all of your URL slugs. So each page should be localized for that language as well. So on your, I can use another language, on your Swedish website, make sure each page has the localized Swedish language across the entire URL and in especially the URL slug, and the same for every language. So this is the number one thing that you have to set up in the beginning, because if you don't have that set up correctly, then you're going to add additional struggles for yourself as long as you're doing SEO, and you may even make it impossible to rank, because Google has to first understand which language is this page, and Google crawls things based on links. So it reads all of the URL, and especially the URL slug, when it's trying to understand a language. And so if you don't have that piece, you've already first confused Google. But of course, you want to ensure for your reader as well that things are also grammatically and language-wise correct. And that's just the first step to doing that. So once you have all of that set up, that's when then you can start doing keyword research and setting up your strategy. So I talked a little bit about how to do keyword research just a bit ago. Start by, you can do a quick direct translation when you don't have an idea, but then, go through and review all the SERPs, understand the intent. What are the competitors that are appearing for this keyword? Are people phrasing it in a different way? Is there, search volume for a different way of saying things? We've seen very common, again, also Eastern European languages, when you take the native phrase versus the translated phrase, you might have 3 or 4 times the search volume, because that's just how people are saying it. And then build your keyword research based on that. Try to group everything based on where it should go on each page of your website. And then from there, you can start producing your content. And when you do it this way with the localized approach, and then you have those local keywords identified already, then creating content for that is very easy because you understand what is the intent behind this, what's showing up in SERPs. So what type of content do I need to create, whether it's transactional or informational or something in between. And then you can keep going from there. And then, of course, tracking and optimization is also super, super important. Another really common mistake we see is that per market tracking isn't done. It's just looked at from the root domain or like the .com, for example. And then this also, misconception that, okay, international is performing great because the .com is performing great. Well, no, actually it's not, because if you look into those specific markets and then you base your tracking on how you set up, those homes of those different languages separately, then you will see how performance is really going. So maybe one market is performing better than another, and you have to make some changes in one market, and maybe one market you want to double down because it's doing really well. And all of that is going to play into how that affects conversion, sales, leads, things like that as well. So it's very, very important to track each individual market and then optimize accordingly. So it all kind of, in the end, is its own little bit of separate strategy, but that's why it does help to have, separately the native speaker who understands the nuances of that market, but then also kind of a top level person that's making sure that, product descriptions aren't like completely different and describing something, otherworldly, or, saying things that are inaccurate, or, things that don't fit, like legal changes or something. GDPR, for example, comes to mind, which is the data privacy laws in the EU that are very, very different from a lot of the rest of the world. So things like that, of course, you would have to, really individualize per each market, because Germany even has more strict GDPR rules than the EU. So there's all of these layers that go into it. And of course, you just want to make sure at the end that everything is correct and it's, helpful to your reader, because that's the best way to really engage them and hopefully convert them later on.
I have a question about specifically the German market. So when we say German market, do you focus on Germany, or is it at the same time Austria and Switzerland, or do you have a specific person for Austria and specific for Switzerland? And another follow-up to that is, like, obviously not everybody has all the resources in the world. What is like the least minimum that you can do, like to get started on the right track? It's a pretty big question, but I would like just the German language, well, how it works in a country and in globally, and well, specifically Switzerland, Austria. I'm not sure, maybe there's one country in Africa that has German in there because of the colonization times. Anyway, so yeah, just wanted to get your breakdown of a specific language. In your experience, how does that work?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's also a really commonly asked question is, should I then have a separate part on the website for different markets that also speak the same language? And to give a very annoying answer in SEO, it depends. So it depends on if there's really enough variation to warrant that effort. Is there a big enough difference between what people search for and what people are interested in between the different countries of the DACH region? This is the German-speaking region, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Or can we just do everything, one place for the German language website, and is that enough? And I would say in most cases, the one language is enough. One, because the total population of these countries is not so much that there's going to be so much search volume that it's really worth it to have 3 separate managed like subfolder sites. And then also there might not be so much variation. So in German, for example, there's Hochdeutsch, High German, which is like the most common form of German that a lot of people in Austria and Switzerland also speak. So they could inherently be using those terms when they're searching anyways, even though they also might speak Swiss German and Austrian German as well. And so I would say in most cases, you can keep it at one language is in one place and you don't need to split it out for different markets because you can rank in all three of those countries with pure German content. But if you found for some reason for your specific product or service or industry, there are big variations. This a native speaker would know. You can ask them if they think there are big differences. Then they can give you a better answer based on the specific instance.
From what I understood is anyway, the bottom line is if there's a search volume, if there's demand in a country, then because obviously if we take the example of German, we have this response. If we take English, every country basically deserves its own approach to its own content. Everything needs to be unique. So yeah, the bottom line is definitely to do the keyword research, find out if there's demand on the data level to this. Rick, thank you. This was interesting. And with the rise of voice search and AI, how do you see this impacting multi-language keyword research and going forward?
Yeah, so I find this a very interesting topic in the context of multi-language because you can essentially use ChatGPT or AI the same way that people have already long been using Google Translate. If you're just using it for that kind of purpose, I don't really find it any different or anywhere useful. So I don't really suggest to go, tell ChatGPT translate this from English to Hungarian or whatever. It's probably not going to do a very good job, especially with some of the languages where there's not a very big population. Then the database for that language is also pretty limited, most likely. So you might get some strange information that's not exactly correct. Where I have found it to be useful, though, AI in general is short descriptions, things like metadata or also content ideas, because we do in general for our clients and for my agency AS Marketing, we do a lot of content repurposing. So repurposing ideas across different channels and across different languages and things like that. And so then it can kind of be useful when you're feeling stuck, how can I rephrase this in a different way that I haven't said 3,000 times? So then it can come up with something useful like that. So it really depends on how you use it. In the context of keyword research, even in English, ChatGPT doesn't show real live search volume. So it's not super helpful in that context. You still need to use an SEO tool if you want to translate keywords and look up the search volume and things like that. You're still going to have to use an SEO tool for that. It kind of depends on how you use it. Some useful points, but I think at the end of the day, the important thing is not to think of ChatGPT as another mass translator, because it's really just not. It's not very good at that. It doesn't understand so it's based on large language models, which has a lot of the obstacle behind it is there's just not these nuances behind it, and it doesn't understand cultural changes and context. So I actually wrote, if you're interested in reading later, I wrote a very long article in the Wix SEO Hub about this, where I did a lot of research on this topic. So some scientific studies have basically shown that it doesn't understand language context, and that's predominantly in English. So it's definitely not going to be able to do that in most of the other world languages as well. So, just be aware of how you use it. Try to use it for only short things that you can very easily proofread. And that's probably the best way that you can integrate it. And if you want to become more efficient.
Yeah, we'll see how it changes in the future. But yeah, I haven't been able to expand to any other languages than English to get at least variable results. Yeah, and I want to talk a bit about the cultural nuances. I realize that we talk about basically the same thing over and over, but just a small little shades of it change. So now I want to talk about specifically cultural nuances, just to let people know that about I don't know, the word boots and cleats, that could be completely different. So just talk about something that can go very wrong. And I know from a case that we had at my university, we had to promote a company for China, but the company had the letter L in it or something, and the Chinese could not pronounce the letter L, so we had to rebrand it. So it's okay for them. And there's also another case is the Pajero Jeep. There's a model, and it's called something completely different in the US, and it's called pajero
Yeah.
because it's actually an offensive word in Mexico, I think. So I just want to talk about a bit that. How do you, well, obviously I already know the answer to this, but I would just love to hear it from you, like the little cultural things that can destroy or build our content website and our presence online. Can we talk about the culture a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like you mentioned, the offensive things, that's the number one thing that you want to avoid, because some things that are, a joke in one language are offensive in another language, and not even just like from translating it, but like culturally speaking. I know the German market the best, so that's what I can talk about personally. Just an example again is with data privacy, like where in the US, it's very common that, you may give a friend of yours who you think should be friends with another friend, you might give their phone number or their email address or something. Like in Germany, you do not do that. People get so angry. You have to really, really make sure that you ask permission, get clear written permission to give any sort of confidential data away about a person, even literally their last name. So you will see it's very common for Germans on Facebook. I've started doing it as well, actually, because the data privacy thing is kind of growing on me living here. That you'll see that they have completely different names on Facebook. So you don't know their real name from their Facebook name because there's just no data privacy around it. So that then, of course, lends into the business life, just how careful you have to be with GDPR regulations and NDAs and things like that. And, if you have a company that talks about these topics within your content, just make sure that you're doing that very, very carefully and you have that set up with those cultural differences in mind. There's another big one as well when it comes to payment terms. So Germans are very, very cash dependent still. It's a very cash first country, which is kind of ironic because you think of like all of the big technological and engineering developments that come from here, but everyone still pays with cash. There's a lot of places where even restaurants where you go and you have to pay in cash or you can't pay it. That's the only option. So it's kind of the same when it comes to big payments as well, that everyone wants the option to pay with invoice because they don't use credit cards. Like people they don't use credit cards here. And there's only one form of debit card, which is an EC card, which is like a German specific card that is the only card you can make payments with here. So if you have your systems set up to only be like a PayPal payment or only be like a Stripe payment or something like this, and you're trying to, collect payments from the German market, well, you're probably going to lose a huge amount of conversions like that, like especially if you're in e-commerce and, for that market, if they go up and see those are the only two options, nope, they're gonna quit. They don't like it. So these are little things that you always have to keep an eye on. Just things like jokes as well. Is this an okay joke to say in this language versus another? Yeah, phrasing for different things, the names of different things. I have some examples between English and German, but they could be a little bit offensive, so I won't say them here. But there are things that if you translate into German from English, it is directly offensive. So you have to keep up, with those little things. And the native speaker, they're going to know a lot of this stuff. So this is really what it rests on. So don't try to do multi-language stuff without a native speaker, whether that's in-house or through an agency or through a consultant. Please at least find that person who understands the language and they can help you avoid any fiascos.
Yeah, appreciate the advice, Adriana. And we're actually coming up to our last question, which is basically an open-ended, like a takeaway. So if there's anything that we missed, if there's anything that you really think that people who are listening to this podcast right now, who are working with multi-language projects online, if there's anything that they should know or this, either what we missed or you just give them like, I don't know, 3 things to do right now. As soon as they step away from their computer, what can they don't need to step away. They need to just switch the tab and go to their website. And what can they do right now?
Yeah. So actually, if I can answer your question from earlier about the most efficient way to do things or how to get started, that would be my advice for this. rather than trying to think about, okay, I want to go international and multilingual for like the whole world and all the major languages at once. And then you just go, that's so much work. Now, how can I do all of that? Just focus on one market, start on one market and make sure that that market is done really well. Work with a native speaker who speaks the language, do your individual keyword research, understand the local competitors, localize your content really well for that market, track it, see how performance is going, and then you can get a really good idea of how to expand that. So the opposite of that approach, which actually we just got asked by this from a client literally today, can we just copy paste everything that we're doing in Germany and France and run that all across the EU because it's the same, right? No, it's not the same. So all of those markets speak different languages, they have different behavior, and it can sound like a lot of work to try to match all of that. And so some people try to go directly for that approach, but that's a perfect way to just spend a lot of money on things that don't really have an output. So it's better just to focus on one market, do it really well, go through the process of localization, really understand that audience, and then it will be so much easier to replicate once you have a good understanding of how all of that works, both from your target audience and in terms of like your production workflow, your operational workflow for building your strategy, getting content live and tracking and optimizing later on.
Great. A very interesting topic, but definitely we need to, I don't know, maybe next time focus on takes. I always love like a workshop. I feel like people understand a lot more from workshop, but in any way, I feel like the people who are interested in doing multi-language research and working globally have gotten what they need. But I will definitely love to have you back for another talk, and we can dive deeper into keyword research and and perhaps AI will have a lot more to offer then, and we'll have sort of reflect on what happens in the world. Anyway, I want to thank you, and I want to sign off by saying that today, Adriana Stein shared with us her expertise on how to do keyword research across languages, how to localize for international SEO, and understand local search intents. Thank you for your time, and be sure to subscribe and join the next episode of the Do Follow podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much.